are beginning. Hello, everybody. I'm John Langdon. I work in the athletic department at Belmont, help out with advising, academic advising. And we decided today to have a panel of some professors and student athletes to talk about academic integrity. So these individuals have taken time out of their days to kind of talk about this issue and kind of the solutions that can come out of, like, if we have problems, what solutions we can grow out of this. So I'm going to start off. I don't know who's going to lead off. Is it Mike? Who's going to lead off? Is it Mike or is it Marnie? I forgot on the outline, so sorry.
I think we're going to have introductions first.
Okay,
yeah.
Go ahead.
So Haskell, you can start.
Sure, I'm Haskell Murray. This is my 7th year at Belmont. I teach in the business school. I teach business law primarily and also business ethics and negotiations.
And I'm Jennifer Thomas, and I teach in the biology department, and I've been at Belmont for 20 years. This is my 21st year, and I teach courses in microbiology, introductory biology for majors and non-majors, cancer biology, immunology. Yep.
My name is Marnie Vandenhoven. I am in exercise science, and I teach classes like exercise physiology and classes in the sports medicine minor. And I am the director of the Bell Corps, our general education program.
Well, students, it's good to see you all here with us today. Thanks for making the time for this. My name is Mike Pinter. I'm a faculty member in the math department, although I spend most of my time in recent years as director of the teaching center, which means I work with faculty across campus on their own professional development. So I teach less than my colleagues that are with us here today, too, for that reason. I teach one course a semester, and usually an upper level course for majors, although I also regularly teach what's the general education math course for honors students. I've been at Belmont. This is my 32nd year, and my wife teaches in the English department here. So we've been a Belmont family for over 30 years.
Why don't we have the student athletes kind of introduce yourself, just say who you are, your year, your major, and then what sport you play.
I can go. My name's Caroline Daniel. I run cross country and track for Belmont. I'm an exercise science major. Hi, Marnie. And were there any other questions? Oh, I'm a senior.
I'm Erin. I'm on women's tennis. I'm exercise science major and bio minor, and I am a senior.
My name is Hayden Smith. I'm a senior accounting and finance major on the cheer team.
So I think next we're going to talk about some of our experiences with student athletes. So Haskell, you can start us off.
Sure. My experience with Belmont student athletes has been almost entirely positive. I've been really proud of Belmont as an institution of hiring, or not hiring, but recruiting, true student athletes that take their classes seriously. Most of the student athletes that I've taught have been professional and dedicated and considerate and thoughtful and that sort of thing. I think, I've had a few instances which have really just come down to what I think is just a lack of communication. I mean, one of the things that I think, at least I'll talk about today, is over communicate with your professors. I mean, I would like to be over communicated with. And so, in some cases, especially in season, I think it can get to a point where the student forgets to communicate with the professor all of the different things that they have going on, or if they're going to miss an exam because of a game and need to have that rescheduled. So some of those minor issues, but some of my very best students, all around students, have been student athletes. And I'm thankful to Belmont for that, because that's not true at all institutions. I have colleagues at other institutions who dread when they've got a bunch of student athletes in their classes. And that's just not been my experience.
Yes, so I completely agree with Haskell's assessment. I've always been so pleased with the student athletes that I've had. Same idea. It's not that way at a lot of other institutions. And sometimes I have friends and family early on who would make jokes about, you know, student athletes. And I'd say, oh yeah, no, they're really good. They're like some of the top students in the class. And I think that sort of grit that a lot of student athletes have, the ability to work in teams, just a really great balance. I find that student athletes sometimes are the very best at planning because you have to. And, you know, I've joked with some of them, they talk about they're actually not as good as with planning when they're off season. They're actually more organized and more together when they're in season. So all of those qualities of dedication to a goal, teamwork, all of those show up in the classroom. And I've been so pleased to have so many great student athletes in my classes.
I am exceptionally biased with the group that's on this call for sure, but I can say I have loved having student athletes in my class. They are some of my favorite people in general. They are not only great athletes on the field, but excellent in the classroom and tend to be leaders in our classroom, which is one thing that I always appreciate. I can always look to an athlete to start a conversation if we're trying to discuss something in class and share their thoughts and ideas, and that teamwork or cooperation that student athletes have naturally always comes through in the classroom. And I have always enjoyed having student athletes in my classes at Belmont. So I'm very grateful for all the hard work that you guys put into your academics, because it definitely shows. And I think that that's a consistent message that you will hear from faculty.
I'll echo what my three colleagues just said and add on to that. That I generally get excited when I learn that I have a student athlete in the class. I know that student athletes bring a self-discipline, bring something that's important in anything I teach, the willingness to try and not succeed and get up and try again and again and again and again. And that's real important, I think. And so I welcome that. I enjoy getting to know a little bit about the student athletes sport, if it's one that I don't know much about, or their successes or challenges. So I just, everything that my three colleagues said, it couldn't be truer for me too.
Sorry. So I think we're going to talk now about sort of what academic integrity looks like, how we view it. And Marnie will start us off with that.
Great, thanks, Jennifer.
Sure.
When every student comes to Belmont, they sign an honor pledge that discusses what academic integrity means at Belmont. And so by signing this honor pledge, you say that you are going to uphold your responsibility to learn the information that you're being taught, because academic dishonesty cheats you out of your education. The loss of academic integrity is the same no matter what setting you're in. And in your honor pledge, it talks about curricular and co-curricular activities. And those are things that you do in a classroom as part of a class, but also things that you do as part of something like WellCore, which is an academic requirement, a graduation requirement, but not necessarily something that you consider the same as class. But we consider it the same from an honors pledge perspective. So things that are included in academic integrity, which would be things like cheating, so unauthorized use of notes or aids when you're trying to work on an assignment, fabrication, making up something that you are working on by either inventing or falsifying information, or presenting information that you've gathered using means that were not acceptable. For example, using the internet when you were only supposed to use class notes. Plagiarism, which is submitting material that is in part or whole someone else's work and not your own, or not citing information that you should have cited if you were quoting sources. Doing multiple submissions. So for example, if you are working on an assignment and you have a similar topic in two different classes, and you submit the same paper in each class without permission from your professors, that is considered a form of academic integrity that you have failed in. And obtaining a fair advantage. And so it's kind of fun to talk to athletes about academic integrity from this perspective. It is gaining an advantage when you otherwise would not have had one. So in sports, we think a lot about things like using steroids for an advantage on the field. This would be using someone else's notes for an advantage off the field, right? And so one of the biggest and most important concepts about academic integrity is leveling the playing field and making sure that everyone is doing something so that they are working on a system that is just and fair. And that is also one of the things that drives people to cheat, is that sometimes they're concerned that other people are doing something that gives them an advantage and makes them want to do something to get an advantage as well. So that's obtaining an unfair advantage. Aiding and abetting, which would be helping somebody else get information or do their homework in a way like giving someone a copy of an assignment or copy of an exam that they did not have a right to have, or was before they were supposed to have that. And then also unauthorized access. So viewing or altering computer records in any way, releasing or distributing any information that you got via unauthorized access, or even interfering with the availability of using computer or systems for an assignment. So there are lots of different forms of academic integrity that we can discuss, but those are just a few examples. So I'll open it up to anybody that wants to comment on those different examples or add anything to those.
I'll just mention that prior to COVID and this, you know, the type of learning that we've had to go to being on Zoom, for the most part, the most common kind of violations of the honor pledge that I experienced would be in the realm of plagiarism. And my sense was over the years is that it was very often not intentional. So students would just not know how to cite or not really quite understand how to put things in their own words. And so that was something that it was very clear I needed to help students along with. But then once last spring came along, then I started seeing all kinds of things. And so, you know, it's disheartening to know that the variety of different types of honor code violations have increased since we've had virtual school or versions of virtual school. But again, historically, plagiarism was the one that was just always very difficult. And again, I rarely felt that it was intentional.
Something that's coming to mind to me, I think is related to this immediate piece. And I can imagine it presents a challenge to students in general, including those of you who are student athletes, is you're dealing in a given semester with 3, 4, 5 different instructors. And that creates all kinds of challenges communication-wise and whatnot. And even more so now during the pandemic. But so what Dr. Vanden Noven was describing, what does that mean exactly in my course as opposed to Dr. Thomas's course or somebody else's course? So I'll give you an example from mine, and I might be different from other faculty. I'm sure I am in some regards. So I have my students in math classes regularly complete problem sets that they have out for a while and they turn in. And I will say to them, because I value collaboration, we collaborate during class time. I want them talking to each other about the problem set as they work on it. And I'll say something to the effect, I'll remind them of the honor code and I'll say, you know, talk with each other, but what you turn in is your own work. And I realize in saying that there's some gray area there. I choose not to go to the very black and white. And I know some faculty do. Here's a problem set. You cannot talk to anybody or open your laptop while you're working on the problem set. I opt for the requires a little bit of interpretation on the student's part. And so, but a fact, you know, as a student, you might hear something quite different from another faculty member. And I think that can be a challenge, and we'll talk about solutions and other things in a little bit, but to anticipate one of those, like Dr. Murray said, communicate, over communicate with regards to any of these things. If you're not sure, you know, what is reasonable, expect fair game in my class versus another class.
Well, and to confuse things a little bit further, I even have different standards for different assignments, right? So certain assignments, the point of the assignment is for you to collaborate. and to do group work and to work with other people. And then certain assignments, I want to make sure that it's your work and that you understand the concepts. And so it's confusing, but it's important to pay attention to each particular assignment and what the, given rules are for that assignment. And if the professor's not clear, feel free to reach out. I'm actually amazed sometimes at how few emails I get from students. I mean, I get some, but I would almost expect more. And I welcome those. So don't be afraid to reach out if you have any question on that sort of thing. Better safe than sorry, for sure.
I would just add to that the idea that I do think professors have become more aware, again, of the difficulty of honor code violations. And so I'm chair of the biology department. So we talk often as a group about, our responsibility as professors to do exactly what Haskell and Mike have talked about, and that is to make it very clear what it looks like for that assignment, for that class. And sometimes professors don't do that, I think, and assume that you all know what we mean because it's in, the handbook. But that's where I think students, especially leaders like athletes, can, raise their hand in class and ask the question, what would plagiarism look like? What would cheating look like on this particular assignment? Just so everybody's clear. And I think if professors think about it more and explain more and students ask more, then that's going to be a really nice solution to that part of it. And so like Dr. Pinter was talking about this idea of collaboration, I always want my students to collaborate. We're doing some really challenging activities and but I'll tell them collaboration is the talking that you do. And then when you write things down, you need to be by yourself. And my hope is that students do this in your room alone, and you are writing out your thoughts based on the discussions that you've had. And then other little things, a trick that I got from a colleague of mine is that when she asked students, when you collaborate, make sure that you write your name on their paper and then they write their name on your paper, so that when we're reading things and we see common answers, especially if they're off the mark, we don't automatically jump to the assumption that a student has been cheating with somebody else, that we know it was based on a collaborative effort that again was maybe a little off the mark, and that's why it stood out. So professors and students, I think, both play a role in trying to make sure that everybody understands what sort of the requirements of the assignment are and where the parameters are.
I think sometimes too that some students don't realize how easy it is for us to tell sometimes when somebody has cheated or when somebody's plagiarized. And sometimes for me, it's something as simple as somebody not changing the font from something that they copied and pasted from a website. And so I'm reading along in a paper, it's Times New Roman, and then boom, all of a sudden it's Calibrate. And that's a dead giveaway. And there are times when I have copied and pasted something from someone's paper into the internet and found that website because it's the first one that they found, went to that website, copied and pasted it and put it into a document. That's a dead giveaway. So it's little things sometimes like that that make it very easy. And also, I will say when students write papers or when they have to give longer written answers, if they're using words that I have never heard them use in the classroom, vocabulary that we maybe have not talked about in class or they haven't had exposure to, that's kind of professional language. There have been times where I've questioned someone about their choice of words or done the same. If it's written, I've typed it into the internet and found that exact thing copied directly from the internet. And so it's so easy to find answers like that. And it's so difficult, but I think there are many times, just like Haskell said, where I don't mind if you look on the internet and I don't mind if you read that information and if you share the concepts with me, but what I want you to do is take that, digest it, and give it back to me in your own words. And so that makes a big, big difference to me.
Yeah, similar to what was just being mentioned, one signal to me that there may be some inappropriate use of materials going on is, so back into a mathematics setting, if a student is using a notion we haven't talked about in our class and notation and ideas, and I have reason to suspect they wouldn't have encountered that anywhere else, that's a pretty big tip off that, okay, it looks like something just got, went to the internet, found something and popped it right back in. Or if the support for a solution to a problem doesn't use remotely anything that we have talked about, that can be a signal. I have a colleague in the department who was talking to me in the fall about something that she wasn't looking for this. We're not looking for trouble in this regard. Faculty really don't like having to address this because it's complicated and we know the pain of it for everybody. But so my colleague discovered that 2 students had submitted something and they had both gone to the solutions manual online. They had gone to the instructor solution manual that they were able to find online. And that was explicitly stated as off limits. And there were clear indications that they had done that. And so she kind of had no choice but to go through with processing it. But that was her signal that, all right, I wasn't looking for problems here. I wasn't looking for cheating, but there it is. They accessed something they shouldn't have.
I'd also just underscore the idea that teachers are not looking for this. I mean, it's devastating once you realize what's happened. I mean, I'm sure it's devastating for the students once they're alerted that they've been caught. But as chair of the department, sadly, this past fall, I was involved in every single case of an honor code violation just because I was the chair. They were all very different. They were lots of different faculty members, lots of different students. But in every case, it was one of those things that the professor, they weren't looking for it, but they could not ignore it. And I had lots of professors in my office just saying, I just hate it. Like, it's just terrible. But you feel, as much as we want to hold you all accountable to the honor code, like, we have to be accountable to it as well, and to not move forward with an honor code violation. It feels terrible to do it, but you can't not do it, kind of thing. So I think sometimes students perceive professors as just trying to catch you, and that's not it at all, not at all. Yeah.
And I would just say, be really careful with information that you may uncover online. Because I mean, I've Googled my own classes and there's some stuff about my classes out there that's just straight up incorrect. And if you go to these websites that are providing this information, you take the incorrect information and use it on an assignment, that's going to be pretty clear evidence that you are off base. And I change my course every semester. And so I've had, instances where it's pretty clear that the student had information about a previous semester's paper or a previous semester's, problems. And the names are different. The fact pattern's a little bit different, but it's somewhat similar. I write all my own questions on my exam. Sometimes just changing one word in law changes the answer. So I have a very similar question, add in not, or add in, some other fact pattern, and it changes the question. And so just be careful about, trying to get information from these different websites that, take past classes, because that's a pretty easy way to get caught.
Another thought I had kind of relating to some of the things we've been mentioning here is, I think this is true in general for faculty. I would say it's true for me, that I'm trying to communicate as clearly as I can to students and succinctly about everything in the course, but including what's acceptable, what's not, what's allowed, what's out of bounds. It may not be clear to students, though I'm trying my best to. And so, ask. I'm never trying to have a gotcha, sort of thing. So if I can say something better, clear, more clear, be more transparent, I want to do that, and I'm trying to do that. But still, sometimes I leave things more ambiguous than I want, and we keep circling back around to communication, and that's a big part of this, I think, and it's a two-way flow. I have a huge responsibility in that regard, but so does every student in my class too.
I'm curious if any of you students have any questions or, friends who have scenarios and you want to ask about your perspectives on just general things about the Student Honor Pledge.
Yeah, so I guess kind of one comment I would make sort of around that remark is like, so obviously, these aren't things that students are probably going to be talking about a lot, among each other, obviously. So sort of what do you think is sort of some of the best ways to set an example for something that is obviously not going to be discussed to great deal? I mean, obviously you might have some people who discuss it out in the open, but sort of what would sort of your guys' advice be to sort of set the example in something that is kind of in the shadows in and of itself?
I think that's a great question. I think that's a great question because I have seen both situations where groups of students have talked about having access to an exam and they've passed it out to one another and shared that information. Other students being upset that they didn't get that exam. Other students upset that somebody else had an exam, and even though they had access to it, they didn't want access to it because that's cheating. And so I think you guys are such excellent role models already. And I think one of the things that you do so well already is being a great example. And one of the things that we've already discussed is the fact that you are prepared and that you communicate well. And those are two things that I think are so extremely helpful. One of the situations where I've had a student cheat in class was because they were under a lot of stress, forgot about an assignment, had to rush and get it done, and then copied and pasted a lot of information from somewhere else. And being prepared is one of those things that you can do. And then also communicating. And what I would so much rather have happened is instead of her turning in something that she copied from the internet, send me an email. Tell me that you're struggling, you've fallen behind, you need some help. Could you turn it in by the end of the day? Absolutely. I'm always going to work with you on that. Now, not everybody can and not everybody will, but so much better to have asked the question than to get a 0 on the assignment because I realized that you copied and pasted it from the internet. So I would say one of the easiest things you can do is be a role model and hold each other accountable. So your teammates, when you are having conversations, and especially as you bring freshmen into your families, your team families, that you are having conversations about what's right and what's wrong, or that you are setting a standard where everybody knows that you've done your own work because they've seen you working hard. They've heard you talking about the things that you do. If they have questions, they can ask you, and that you're encouraging them to do the same.
I certainly agree with what was just said there. And something else I thought of, and I'm going to offer an example, but you all would have better examples than I do probably because it's where you live. But are there notions out of athletics, if you're talking to fellow teammates, your sport or more generally other sports, that might have some resonance? So one example I thought of is, what if you're a team sport, let's say basketball, and somehow or another a video recording of your top rivals practice has been made and shown up on the internet, and you now have access to it. I would imagine that's out of bounds of fairness that you study a rival's practice when it was not intended to be public. And so it gets, maybe that's a way of thinking about the unfair competitive advantage sorts of things. Of course, you're looking for fair competitive advantages in sport. Maybe you are in the classroom, maybe not, depending on whether you're graded on a curve or whatever. But are there analogies, ideas that your peers could immediately resonate with and have a sense of, yeah, that's just not right. That wouldn't be the appropriate thing to do.
I think also for some of you who are upperclassmen, you've been through a few years. You sort of know how college works that maybe some of the new students don't. And I'm always shocked, going back to the example that Marnie gave. Marnie's comment was, instead of contacting the professor, you get a 0. But of course, it's not just a 0, then you get an honor code violation. So it's a double whammy. I'm shocked at how many, for example, I'll take a standard class that I have, microbiology. Like, we have tons of work to do. There are tons of assignments. There's really very few assignments. An exam would be one, but very few assignments that are going to make or break your grade if you had something that happened in your life that you couldn't complete the assignment. Like, it's just not going to make that much of an impact. And yet students will become desperate, realize they have something due, and then they'll cheat. And I'm like, this was worth 0.05% of your grade. Just the idea of understanding the value, grade value of a given assignment, I think that's often so not clear. And that's probably some perspective that you all would have as older students, in talking with people who are on your team. Like, if you're freaking out right now, ask yourself, well, like, is this really worth it? And maybe you do contact the professor and say, can I get an extension? And I think Marnie's more flexible than I am, but there are also different reasons for an exception or an extension, a death in the family, a flat tire, like what, but I just think it's shocking to me how much students will go to extremes on something that has very little impact in the long run.
I was thinking of something else here as maybe a way to, as upperclassmen, you can talk to underclassmen in language that would resonate with them right away, not just language, but experience. I would imagine in some way, shape, or form, underclassmen, and you all, when you were underclassmen, it gets communicated to you, and you learn quickly enough that it is not sufficient to operate the same way you did in high school as an athlete as at a NCAA Division I. It's just not. You're not going to last very long. A few exceptions, maybe, by and large. Well, true in the classroom also, that you're in higher education, you're in university setting. And so you may well get pushed to the edge of what your capabilities are, just like you are in athletics. So, what do you do in athletics to up your game, quite literally? How can you carry that over into the mindset and actions and preparations and such that you take with regard to your classes?
I have something that's like a little different turn from this, but it's like situations I've noticed since COVID and doing schooling online and everything with academic integrity that have been happening. And it's more so like with exams, having them open at separate times. So like if an exam's open for like a 24-hour period and people can take it at any time of the day, I've noticed that people, like, if say I take it at like 8 a.m. and I have friends in the class who are planning to take it at like 3, it's like common for people to be like, oh, have you taken it? Like, what was on it? More so than what it used to be, because we would all take it at the same time and then walk out. So that's something that I've noticed. People, it's tough with like close friends too, like people wanting to ask and then like kind of beat around the bush and be like, oh, I'm not, like, you don't have to tell me everything. But like that's something I've noticed with exams, especially being open at like different hours with COVID and everything structured the way it is now.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Erin, that's so true. Like, it's easier and you may not even want to participate. And yet the discussion over lunch, hey, how was the test? Before you know it, you are now cheating. So last spring, my husband and I, we have 3 children, 3 teenagers, and I was getting frustrated with, the sense that students were cheating more. And they were all, our children were just sort of looking at me, rolling their eyes like, well, yeah, because it's so easy, like, duh. And so I think there's been an effort, and again, in biology, we talk about this all the time, to try to balance the knowledge of that, what you're talking about, Erin, that, you know, the reason your professors give that big gap of time is they want to try to take into account all the difficulties, especially last spring, like, when are you going to take this? So, and if it's an asynchronous class, and one of the concerns is that, you know, you don't want to be too rigid. You want to make sure you give flexibility. But if you do make it rigid, there are a lot of students who will push back on that. You know, they'll say, well, why can't you leave it open? And it's this constant struggle of trying to be fair, but knowing how it can be abused. But then students say, well, I would never do that. And, you know, sure, a lot wouldn't, but then a lot would. So I'm sure the solution is a happy medium in there, but I know that for faculty who have tried to communicate to their students, the reason I am giving you 50 minutes to take this test, the reason I don't allow backtracking, the reason that, you know, I do this or whatever the rules are, is to try to inhibit the making it easy, basically. We want to make it not as easy because we know it is very easy, even without intent. And that's why those rules are in place. But we do get a lot of pushback for that, at least in the biology department.
I would say too, just as students, I mean, doing the cost benefit analysis, you know, of cheating, I mean, I think a lot of students just think, well, the likelihood that I get caught is so low. And is it not really cheating? It's a little gray. But I would just tell you, an honor code violation, not to, you know, be overly dramatic about it, but it can and will follow you around. I mean, I'm the pre-law advisor in the business school, and you can usually tell based on GPA and LSAT scores which students will get into which schools. And the one thing that just throws the calculus off, I will tell you, at least in law, is an honor code violation. I mean, I've seen students who would have been a shoo-in at different schools not get in because of an honor code violation. It's also something in law that you have to disclose that, even if it's in college, to the bar examiners. And they, you know, that may not, that likely won't prevent you from being a lawyer, but it's something that they take into account for sure. And even outside of cost benefit analysis, I think if you really think about, why am I here for an education, right? What is an education for? It's not to get a certain GPA, it's to actually learn things and actually improve in your education, improve in knowledge. And so, you know, you're cheating yourself in a lot of regards if you are participating in cheating, and you're helping, you know, make for an unfair playing field if you participate. And frankly, those friends, to Erin's point, I mean, those friends who are asking you for help, they will likely respect you less if you help them in the back of their mind. You know, they'll be like, oh yeah, you know, thanks for helping me. But they'll be like, aha, that's a friend that, you know, really doesn't have integrity. I've seen that happen too.
I love that point to the law, Haskell, because I'm in healthcare and we have ethics. For every profession that I'm involved in, we have ethics. And one of the ethical considerations is whether or not you cheat or you try to get around the standard rules in order to get something done. I shouldn't be doing it with my patients. I shouldn't be doing it academically. And that can be a problem academically as well. I've seen students get kicked out of PT programs because they've cheated on exams. And I've had conversations with colleagues where students have lost spots in medical school or whatever academic program it is because of their academic integrity or lack thereof. And so I think it's really important to know and understand that. And to Erin's question, I think, you know, if you're ever put in that situation, just say, you can say it was easy, it was hard. That's your perspective. Gosh, it was really hard. Whew. good luck. But you don't have to talk about specifics on the exam. And I think that that's the most important thing. You can talk about the exam itself, but not what was on it, not the content of that exam. And having 24 hours, or I've made exams available for a week. I know the consequences if I do that though. And I think generally I've accepted, and I've actually told students, use your notes, go ahead. It's amazing how we still have a bell curve in that situation. So, but I would challenge you to challenge yourself to just continue to be the best that you can be. And cheating is not one of the ways that you are the best that you.
Another thing that as faculty are considering ways to decrease the chances of honor code violations, I think students can also do that as well. So like if you're taking an exam online and your roommate is in the same class, like don't sit in the same room. One of you go to the library and one of you stay in the dorm room, or, you know, don't put yourself in situations in which you could compromise what you know is the right thing to do, but in the heat of the moment, when you're stuck on a test, all of a sudden everything you know is the right thing to do just goes out the window. I mean, it happens to all of us. And you're maybe not doing a good risk assessment at that point, you know. So putting yourself in a good position to decrease the likelihood of that, I think can go a long way for both professors and students.
So some of these comments are reminding me of things I've come across in recent years as to, well, what kinds of things tend to lead to students cheating. And so one thing, say, related to what's just been talked about a little bit is, well, if I'm a student and I'm in a course that for whatever reason I've decided I don't really care about this course, it's and this kills most of us in this room, but it's just a gen ed course when a lot of what we teach is just gen ed, or I don't really have to have it for this or the other. You're more prone as an individual, you're more prone to then step over that line of, this isn't going to hurt anybody, it's not making any difference to me. If you've already kind of sold yourself that bill of goods that I don't care about this. So how do you as an individual not get to that point? So a lot of this is, you know, going back upstream, and how do I from the very beginning of the course engage myself in the course? All right, certainly my instructor has a huge responsibility and onus to get me involved, but it's not entirely up to the instructor by any means. So what do I do? How do I, in week 1, in week 2, week 3, help talk myself into this has some value, so that when I get in that situation down the road, I have developed a care for the course, and now I'm going to research those pretty strongly. I'm going to be less likely to violate that, if you will, or if I've done something to develop a connection with the instructor. All right, your instructors, by and large, probably are trying to really develop a connection to you, but if you've reached back at all, you will probably be less likely because you care about the instructor and you know your actions actually hurt the instructor. So these are some things that aren't the day of the test you show up and go, okay, I'm motivated now. I really care about this, when you've been telling yourself in your head for weeks, I don't care about this, what am I doing, sort of thing. And I suspect there's a huge amount of your mindset from your athletics that comes into play here. You don't just show up on game day and say, let's go, let's play. You've been developing, and your coaches have been right there with you at your elbow or in your face or whatever, helping you develop that mindset. All right. And in a lot of regards, it's what you do when you're out of view of anybody else that helps you prepare for what you do when you're time to perform, if you will.
I don't know if we wanted to talk a little bit about Blackboard. I know that's something that we discussed in preparation for this panel. If anyone wants to chime in about just the fact that so many assignments are now going through Blackboard. Shall I start? I don't know. Anybody want to say anything? I'll just mention a few things. So any students who are watching this video will know that I am terrible at technology, but I have learned some things, sadly, through some honor code violations. I had one a couple of summers ago, and it was like some like some CSI sort of TV show where I knew something was wrong with submissions from a student. So I called the people who handle this, and they laid it out for me, every click, everything on Blackboard that the student did. Like, I didn't even know that was an option. It's shocking what sort of footprints are left. It's kind of like banking, I suppose. I don't know. Like, they know every time you log in, they know everything you click on, they know everything you submit, they know when you go back and look at it, they know everything. And so in the situation in the summer, it was a student who, I'm not even going to tell you what she did. It was very clever, but she got caught, and it was not fun catching her at all. But man, she had a whole scheme, but they could look at all of her submissions and every time she got on Blackboard. And I sometimes wonder if she had known that in the front end, which I myself didn't know and have even learned more since then, would students actually do that if they knew how much we could see in the record keeping of Blackboard. So, you know, I've thought about expressing to my students, look, you kind of like, you might be able to fool me, but you can't fool Blackboard when it comes to submissions and timing and things like that.
And there are two tools that we can use and that you can use as well in Blackboard. One is called Safe Assign. So if you're writing a paper, it will actually review your paper for you and let you know whether or not there are things within your paper that need citations or should have been cited or are too closely mirroring something that comes from somewhere else. And so that's a really good thing if you're writing a paper and you're not quite sure if you need to cite something in your, you know, it's 11:30 at night and you know that your professor is not going to answer your email, that you could use something like Safe Assign. But it's also something that I can use if I'm grading a paper. So I can have Safe Assign review that paper for me and let me know what percentage of that paper is actually from another source. And so that's a good way for us to kind of keep track of that. But it's also something for you to keep in mind because it could be something that I'm using on a regular basis and I just haven't talked about it in class. But there's another thing that's called Lockdown Browser. So when we give exams, so for example, I have an exam in my sports medicine class tomorrow, and we're doing it in class together online synchronously so that I can answer any questions that students have, but they'll take it online. And what Lockdown Browser does is it makes sure that you cannot go to any other websites while you're on your computer, that you're also not able to copy and paste or print screen or copy your screen. So it disables those keys. Now, obviously there are always workarounds to those things, but if you think about it, if you get a workaround for something that's trying to keep you from cheating, that's like a double cheat. So it's like doubly wrong, right? So just make sure that you're not trying to do that. Like, wait a minute, I can't print my screen so that I can share it with my boyfriend who takes the test later. Why are you doing that? So I think sometimes it's just a matter of thinking these things through a little bit more, but know that we do have tools available to us, just like students have tools available to help them cheat. Sometimes we have tools available to find out whether or not you are, and we don't always talk about them. Just stuff that I think sometimes we think we don't need to talk about it. We just kind of assume that you're all trying to do your best work, and just as we are trying to do our best work as well. But and like Dr. Thomas said, it's probably a good idea that we do share that information with you so that you're aware of it and that those tools are available for you to use as well.
Do any of you students want to share with us the ways that you will know to? We all know about Chegg. Chegg, is that what it's called? Yeah. We know every textbook question is out there on the internet. Like I've even typed in questions that I made up in my brain and Googled it, and the answer is right there, which is very upsetting. So, you know, some teachers use a test bank, and then some teachers make it up in their head or a combination of both. And yet there it is, there's the answer. But I've even had students say, well, you didn't say we couldn't use the internet. Like I'll say, you can't use your book or notes. Well, you didn't say you couldn't use the internet. So, you know, now my list of things that you can't use is very long, just to clarify. But again, I think it gets to when students feel desperate. That's when we make, students, adults, professors, when we make bad decisions is when we're desperate and we can sort of explain away anything. And trying to not get yourself in that position is really the best option, I think. So students, you want to share anything with us?
I guess sort of similarly on that topic, and also a little bit of what Dr. Berry talked about before. And so, obviously, some professors make their own, sort of make their own questions, as well as use like test banks and things like that. Where do you think sort of the balance between either, obviously, I've had tests before that the professor for study guides gives us the previous test, because if you don't know how to do it, it doesn't, they're not going to help you at all. While the others have used study banks as sort of the balance between either, sort of that side of sort of helping prevent students from cheating by having the questions not existing, to sort of the other side of, having like lockdown browsers. I've had professors use that as well. Where do you think sort of the best balance sort of lies sort of in both of those, and both managing students as well as just sort of ease of, learning applications as well?
I think there are a lot of different views on that from different professors. My view has kind of evolved to, my questions should be challenging enough and should involve enough critical thinking, and should not just be pure memorization, and shouldn't be Google. You shouldn't be able to just Google and find the answer. So I've been moving more and more toward essay-based, paper-based, thoughtful, and that's not possible in all classes, right? I mean, then it's not going to be possible in a math class, or perhaps a chemistry class or something like that. But my thought is try to minimize the desire to cheat, or even the effectiveness of cheating in that way. And I think that's on professors. And I think it's, again, I think it was up to students. I had a class in college where a big percentage of my classmates were cheating. And I regret not going to my professor and letting him know. I got a much lower grade than most of my classmates because, but he had a closed book exam at home, right? And I knew that all my friends were opening the books and looking at the books and looking at their notes and all that sort of thing. And so, a lot of times you don't feel like ratting on your friends, and I didn't, but I think, professors would appreciate that. I also think, to Dr. Thomas's point, we talk a lot in law about not just the letter of the law, but also the spirit of the law, right? And so, you didn't explicitly have internet on the checklist, but it's pretty clear from the context that this was a closed book, closed outside exam. Don't use that technicality, to use outside resources that are basically, similar to what they're doing. I think Caroline with the runner may know Alberto Salazar, the former Nike coach, track and field. He was sort of infamous for going right up to the line. Oh, USATF says you can't do X, Y, and Z, but what if I do X, Z, and Y? Ooh, we can do that. That is not technically illegal yet, right? And the same thing happened with Enron in the business context. A lot of what they were doing was not technically illegal. Some of it was, but most of it wasn't technically illegal. But it was truly violating the spirit of the law. And I think most of if you ask yourself the question, yeah, this doesn't really feel right. And again, you can ask your professor if it's really gray. But if you're having to ask yourself, this feels a little uncomfortable, it's probably worth not doing.
I will say too, I think, to me, in what I teach, the ultimate test would be oral exams. So, in graduate school, and we do all oral exam, not entirely, but quite a bit of what we learn is tested regularly in practical oral exams. And there is no way to hide in an oral exam that that's just a very time intensive thing. But what I will tell you that what I do in class in lieu of those exams is we have discussions. And in a discussion, I can tell what you know and what you understand. If I ask you a question and you cannot explain to me what we're talking about, that's essentially an essay question. It's just an oral version of that. And I try to make the setting as comfortable and safe as possible. And if within that setting you are still not capable of answering that question, and we have an exam in 2 days and I read your essay and it is like spot on, there's something going on there, and I will probably Google that answer and just to see where you got it, because it doesn't feel like it was yours. So know that we put classes together with intention and not always focused on cheating, but more focused on helping you learn as much as you can through multiple devices, right? So whether it's an assignment or it's an activity or an event or whatever, and all those things are trying to bring home a message that we are trying to get across to you. And your participation in those things provide us with information. They're all data points. And so we use that to help us understand when you answer a question. And sometimes if you're vague in a question, but I know you know the answer because we've talked about it before, I understand that better, what you're trying to express, because we've had a conversation about it. So it's, I mean, we do these things with intention, believe it or not. So sometimes we execute them flawlessly, and sometimes, you know, we try again next semester.
Well, I think we had a really great discussion here, and I really appreciate everybody's participation in this. I think it's an important topic, and I think it's an important discussion to have, just to kind of inform people about, you know, this whole issue. I think there's a lot of students have no idea what cheating is, or what counts as cheating, what does not count as cheating. And I think y'all did a great job of really kind of bringing that out and discussing all the different ways that you discover it, and all the different ways that it can happen very easily. You know, it may seem to be a very simple thing, but it can turn into a big thing if you just, you know. And I think it goes back to the question is, if I have to ask the question, if I have to know this is cheating or not, then it's a pretty good chance it is cheating if you're having to ask yourself that question. So Ryan, do you have anything to add to this?
I would just thank everybody for being on here and having this discussion. I think it's going to be really, really helpful. And going back to maybe Hayden's first question about, you know, what can you do to be an example? I think all of you kind of hit on different things throughout the discussion, but one is just like overly communicate with your professors, and your classmates and your teammates see those things. You know, the way you talk about your classes, I think it's almost like the same thing that you do in practice with your teammates. You don't necessarily say what you're doing or say the example that you're setting, but by your hard work, your dedication, your organization, those things communicate more than you think. So I thank you for everybody. This has been really good.
Yes.
Yeah, can I just say one last thing? I mean, there are going to be some students who are watching this video and they have been found guilty of an honor code violation, or they have violated the honor code and maybe they weren't caught. I mean, I would hate for students, despite the fact that there are consequences for sure, depending on what you go on to do next, I would hate for a student to feel like it's all over, you know, that they are now defined by this and this is who they are. I mean, we have all, I'll say for me, I'm sure I'm surrounded by greatness here, but we've all done some really stupid things and we don't know why we did it. And if we could do it again, we wouldn't. So I would never want a student to feel like that's it for them. I mean, it really is an opportunity to learn what you care about the most, and, you know, what your professors care about and what we're trying to do, and that you can overcome that. And, you know, just kind of don't do it again, sort of idea.
Well, thanks everybody. And I appreciate the time that y'all talked about this issue, and hopefully, just thanks again for everything. So goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.